I've been hiking parts of the Appalachian Trail for about 15 years, successfully thru-hiked at Nobo in 2020, from Georgia to Maine for any readers not familiar with the jargon, and would humbly consider myself an all-around seasoned hiker. I've spent hours searching online, spoken to hiking friends, burned through books at the library, and have simply come up short. I'm writing this post because I've never experienced anything like what happened the last few times I've been on the trail, and need to know if anyone knows what the hell this is. It started happening about 2 months ago on a weekend backpacking trip. I left right from work, so I got a bit of a late start, but I work pretty close to a trailhead that takes me up to a nice, more remote section of the trail. I'm just going to start from the beginning, specific details and all about each day I've been on the trail. Hopefully I overlooked something that makes this make sense. Night 1, I teach high school history, and the students were especially checked out on this Friday afternoon. I can't blame them, it had been a long week. I was eager to finish the day and get out on the trail. The long hand on my classroom's analog clock slogged its way to the 12 as I wrapped up a lecture for my honors U.S. history class. So President Taft's choice to replace Roosevelt's appointed Secretary of Interior really drove this wedge between them. Some saw this as a clear sign that Taft had abandoned the conservation movement. The overwhelming majority of the class were buried in their phones, likely on Snapchat or whatever social media is popular now, probably talking about weekend plans. Well, that will do it for today. Don't forget the quiz Monday. Have a good weekend. The bell rang and the class cleared out quickly as the hallways began to bustle with student traffic. I waited an obligatory 5 minutes before making my own way out, but was caught by a coworker, one of the new hires this year. "Hey, Alex, this week was a tough one. Wanna grab a beer?" Joe was a nice enough guy, a little weird, but he meant well. He was a little quirky and socially awkward, but it's rare to find other teachers who fit the bill as normal. "Hey, Joe, sorry, gotta pass this time. I've got a camping trip planned." "Oh really? Where to?" "I'll be on the Appalachian Trail for 2 nights." "Oh, well I hope you know the rules of Appalachia." He said this with a grin as I stifled an eye roll. Yes, I had heard of the silly rules. I decided to be nice and entertain him. Feigning genuine curiosity, I asked, "What are the rules, Joe?" "Well, there's 3 main ones, a bit of debate about a few others, but here it goes. 1, don't leave the path. 2, don't go into the woods at night. 3, if you think you heard your name, you didn't? Kind of spooky, right?" "Wow, I'll be sure to keep those in mind." Well, I'll let you go. We should hike together sometime." As I began to step away, I smiled and got out a quick, "Sure, that'd be nice. I typically prefer hiking alone. Something about the quiet and single-minded focus on the task at hand always felt meditative to me. I already began to feel the stress-relieving effects of the solitude on the heavily wooded drive up. After driving for about 45 minutes, the narrow country road leading to the trailhead came into view. I turned and found a small empty dirt parking lot accompanied by a singular post marking the trail entrance. It was mid-fall and a little chilly, so I didn't expect to see too many others on the trail. I tied up my hiking boots, got my pack on, and made a quick mental check of all the essentials. Tent, food bag, buck knife, light source, water filter, stove, book, etc. It was time to start on the trail. The first hour of the hike was uneventful. The path was deserted, not a single other hiker in sight. Most of the leaves had fallen from all of the trees as the forest transitioned to winter. The route was a little uphill and a bit rocky, but nothing unexpected. Pennsylvania has a reputation for being one of the rockiest sections of the Appalachian, sometimes mockingly called Rocksylvania. I only have about another hour of hiking before I reach the spot I planned on setting up camp at when I started to hear a faint smacking sound deep out to the left side of the trail. It was clearly quite far away, but it sounded as if someone were smacking tree branches together. I really didn't think anything of it. Things made noise in the woods, trees fell, deer moved around. It only became strange when I realized the noise was changing as I progressed along the trail. For about 10 minutes, I heard periodic spurts of 3 smacks in a row. This might suggest to the reader that it was a firearm of some sort. I'm familiar with quite a few different guns and none that I know of sound like this at a distance. I barely noticed on a conscious level, but the number of successive smacks had increased to 4. I only seriously noticed the transitioning of the smacks after about 30 total minutes of hiking, when it was now up to 5. Whack, 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 whack. I stopped, only just now consciously processing the full strangeness of the noise. I peered off, focusing my gaze as far as I could, towards the direction of the faint smacking. I heard it again, still 5 smacks, whack, 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 still faint and distant. An idea flashed into my head and I quickly turned back on the trail and retraced my steps for about 20 paces. I stopped again and waited until whack, 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 only 4 again. In my view, there were 2 possible explanations. 1, the 5th smack was inaudibly obscured by something on the previous 10 minutes of the trail. However, if that were true, the sound would likely be getting louder and it was still as faint as when I first heard it. 2, whatever was making this noise was reacting to my movement and progress along the trail, increasing the number of whacks the further along I hiked. I decided to move on and put the sound out of my mind. Whatever it was far away, too far to see. Didn't seem likely that it could see me then either. The smacks moved back up to spurts of 5 as I caught up to where I had turned back on the trail. After an additional 10 minutes, I half expected to hear spurts of 6, but the smacking had completely stopped almost exactly as 10 minutes had passed. I walked for about 3 minutes more before I saw something. A tiny little square hung from a piece of string tied to a branch. The square dangled right in the center of the trail, about 5 feet off the ground. I stared at it for a moment, unsure of what it was. I reached out and felt the square to discover it was just folded up paper. I slowly removed the paper and began unfolding it carefully. I had heard of people leaving cryptic messages folded up, hanging from trees in the woods before. It sounds creepy, but it's kind of common in parts of PA. They call them Schuylkill notes. If you're so inclined to look into those, Schuylkill notes typically contain jumbled up cryptic messages about secret societies, the Illuminati, aliens, or anything that might attract conspiracy theorists. The single word on this note, however, left a much more chilling impression. Alex smiley face. I was genuinely scared now. My mind raced, thinking back to Joe's comment about the rules and names. I felt stupid getting so paranoid on the trail, but I was alone, the sun was going down, and I had about 2 hours of hiking between me and my car. I practically ran the remainder of the distance to the shelter where I planned to set up camp. The Appalachian Trail has a bunch of bare bones shelters where anyone can sleep, or in my case, camp next to. When I arrived at the nearest shelter, I stopped and caught my breath. I kept reminding myself that things make noise in the woods and that people have been known to leave weird notes around the woods in this region. The name was a coincidence. It had to be. My name was fairly common. I started to focus on the task of pitching my tent, setting up my sleeping pad, and getting ready for the night as the sun vanished. I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. I honestly would have turned around and gone back to my car if I could have, but it would be seriously dangerous to hike for 2 hours over rocky, downhill terrain in the dark. I laid in my tent, reading by the light of my LED lantern. I skipped cooking dinner that night and just settled for some jerky and a Cliff Bar. My tent provided a false sense of security against whatever was outside, but false security was preferable to none. I eventually drifted off to a light sleep. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. Something big was brushing against the outside of my tent. My food was tucked away in the bear box offered by the shelter, so whatever it was couldn't be after my food. One's mind frequently goes to bear in such situations as a worst-case scenario horrifying situation. A black bear seemed like more of a best-case scenario at this point. They were harmless for the most part, so long as you didn't get in between a mother and her cub. Some irrational part of me hoped that unzipping my tent and revealing the culprit to be a black bear looking for trash would somehow explain the odd happenings of the day and finally make things make sense. I was surprised at myself as I cautiously unzipped the entrance to my tent and readied the lantern to peer outside. It wasn't a black bear. Standing about 5 feet from my tent was what appeared to be a deer. The deer was, disturbingly, standing on its hind legs only slightly hunched over while its front legs bent and its hooves dangled. Its body was riddled with fleas and ticks. I could count at least 8 of them ready to burst from gorging on the deer's blood. Most off-putting was the deer's face, which seemed to be contorted into an attempt at a smile, revealing rows of overlapping teeth. I felt for my buck knife and waited. The deer exhaled briskly out of his nose, breath visible in the October air. Once the deer inhaled, filling up its corrupted body with oxygen, the distorted animal slowly turned around and ran away, the entire time remaining on its hind legs. I zipped up the tent, kept the lantern on, and clutched my knife tightly. I wouldn't be getting much sleep that night. Sorry about the delay in getting this second entry posted. I've had a ton of grading to catch up on. Nothing makes for better weekend leisure reading than half-baked high school history reports. Thank you to anyone who reached out with leads, potential explanations. I've looked a little deeper into some of them. Someone mentioned that chronic wasting disease could be the culprit for the odd behavior of the deer. After my encounter and some brief research early on, I was inclined to believe the same thing. Further developments have, however, challenged this theory. After my first night on the trail and my encounter with the deer, I cut the trip short and had a, thankfully, uneventful morning hike back to my car. I started packing up my gear at the break of dawn and moved out as soon as there was enough light to reasonably hike. The stark contrast of my peaceful morning stroll compared to the bizarre occurrences of the day before made me almost laugh. Was it really all just nothing? I heard a weird noise, found a variation of a squeakle note, and saw a sick deer. Something in the back of my mind remained unsettled. After a couple of hours on the trail, I found my car and drove home. Life, once again, was normal, at least until I returned to the Appalachian Trail. Night 2. Despite the rationalizations I had made to calm my nerves, some of you might still be wondering why I would go back to the Appalachian Trail after such a harrowing experience. Surely nothing about that previous trip was enjoyable. Backpacking is essentially my favorite thing to do in life. I go almost every weekend and try to take day hikes on any odd days off. Nothing was going to scare me away from hiking and backpacking. It would require me to completely uproot my routine and lifestyle of about 15 years. The Appalachian was familiar to me. I knew it well, and it was convenient. I did, however, drive an extra hour and a half to reach a portion of the trail further south in PA, far from the section I had just visited. I was sort of playing hooky on this particular day. We had a teacher in service at school, so no students would be there, just teachers and whoever admin brought in to lecture us about the new bullshit pedagogy that was trendy nowadays. I wasn't missing much. The trail I was on to enter the Appalachian forked off as I arrived at the sign marked, with arrows pointing left or right. I turned left and headed south. There was a decent lookout point not too far. A few miles later, I took out my water for the first time and sipped a bit off the top. I almost dropped it and spilled some in reaction to the sound of an unmistakably distant whack whack whack. How could it possibly be happening again? I was miles and miles from the other section of the trail. Coupled with the chill that ran down my spine, I became exceedingly curious. My mind raced for a potentially solid explanation until suddenly it came to me. This had to be some kind of animal. I knew bucks sometimes rubbed their antlers against trees in the fall. The purpose of this was to remove the velvet that had accumulated on them and prepare them to spar with other males for dominance. The time of year when this occurred was called the rut, and it was just around the corner in PA. What I was hearing must have been deer sparring or hitting their antlers against trees. Armed with a rational explanation and an abundance of daylight left, my curiosity overpowered my fear. Breaking Joe's first rule, I trudged off the path in the direction of the noise. I wanted to put my mind at ease and solve this mystery. I walked for what had to have been a quarter mile, pushing past brush and uneven terrain. Luckily, the ground did not decline too steeply here, ensuring that I stayed straight and could easily turn back directly back to the path. I listened for the noise closely. The strangest thing was that no matter how far I walked, it was still completely distant. Whack, whack, whack. The same volume I had been hearing it. I got the distinct impression that as I moved closer to the source of the noise, whatever was making this noise was making a very calculated effort to move away from me. I eventually came to a steep drop-off and heard the whacking again. Peering down the cliffside, I concluded there was no way anything could have descended this and survived. I kept looking out, trying to identify the culprit of the noise. There was a slight clearing in the trees farther out beyond the cliff, and squinting my eyes I could just barely see something. Standing in the clearing was what seemed to be a nude human figure. Even at a distance, the stark paleness of the figure's skin was evident. I could make out the faint traces of what appeared to be a beard. My heart began thumping. Was this person just fucking with me? I turned around and quickly made my way up to the path, shoving any branches or foliage in my way. I was officially noping out of this day hike. There was a shelter and another exiting path from the Appalachian Trail, about a mile further south. I was getting the hell off the trail and Ubering back to my car at this point. The whacking sound followed me as I traveled. Just as the distant noise had ratcheted up to 5 whacks in a row, I arrived at the shelter and to my immediate relief found another backpacker sitting by a moderately sized fire. He looked up. "Hey, another cold weather hiker. Come warm up if you'd like." I walked over to the older man. He wore a bowl hat and a button down. A large, classic looking tent was pitched behind him. "Sir, I don't think it's entirely safe here." He cut me off with a raised hand and a knowing smile. Calm down, have a seat and relax. You can call me Earl. Tell me what's going on. I'm through hiking for what feels like the millionth time, so I've seen it all." I thought to myself, through hiking in late fall. He would be going through some of the toughest parts of the trail in the dead of winter if he was heading Nobo. I immediately returned my thoughts to the more pressing matter. There's something out in the woods. I saw it about a mile back. I'm pretty sure he was following me. Some pale naked man, I think. Earl laughed. "Oh, you saw one of them. You'll be mostly fine. Don't worry." Who are the they? Some people say they've been in Appalachia for hundreds of years. Others know they've been here much longer. I started to step away from the fire. The shadows of the trees elongated as the sun had miraculously began to set. Earl stood up and waved. "You best head off now, Alex. Wouldn't want to get caught in the dark." I ran as fast as I could, quickly found the exiting path from the Appalachian Trail, and bolted down. It was now pitch black, but I couldn't stop. I tripped on a rock and bruised my knee pretty bad. I got up quickly, fumbled through my bag and strapped on my headlamp. I was now zooming through the trail. There was no possible way enough time had passed for it to be getting dark, let alone be pitch black. Finally, I came to the trailhead entrance and found myself on a pretty, deserted rural road. I pulled out my phone. It was 2:30 a.m. Luckily, my phone still had service and I called an Uber to my car. There was a small town and a bar a few miles up the road, and thankfully available drivers. The wait for the Uber felt like hours, but it showed up and I got to my car safely. I had a long drive home and a lot to process.